A very warm welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on aligning with SDG 6, an investor guide on Basin and Water Security engagement. Today, we will be joined by several speakers from the Swiss government, South Pole, Ceres, and Actiam, speaking about the interconnection between finance and water. We'd like to make the session as interactive as possible. As FMGs, you're all on mute at the moment, but if you do have any questions or comments, please use the question box. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact us directly. For questions related to the presentations, we would like to refer you to the Q&A at the end of this session. This webinar will be recorded and sent to you within the next week. And last but not least, we're all broadcasting from our homes, so please bear with us in case there are any technical hiccups. My name is Mathilde Trice. I'm a consultant at South Pole, and I'll be your host for today. I'm very excited to announce today's speakers, starting with Susan Blank, who is the head of the Economics and Innovation Division at the Federal Office for the Environment. The Economics and Innovation Division has two main tasks. Firstly, it acts as a Federal Office for the Environment Competence Center for Natural Resource Economics, and secondly, it provides politicians and the general public with information on the state of the environment. Oh yes, sorry, please turn on your cameras, all the speakers, please. And next up we have Isabella Pagotto, who is the Senior Advisor and Program Manager at the Global Program Water. The Global Program Water is a thematic division that helps find solutions to global challenges linked to water management. It engages in a global political dialogue and manages specific projects likely to influence regional and international policy. Then we have Robin Miller, who is the Manager of Investor Engagement on Water at Ceres. Robin leads the Investor Water Hub, a working group of the Ceres Investor Network, composed of over 100 institutional investors with more than 20 trillion in assets under management. The hub promotes peer-to-peer learning and a how-to guide on water risk integration called the Investor Water Toolkit. Then we have Jenny Yorish, who is Senior Sustainability Consultant at South Pole. Jenny is the author of two studies that South Pole released for the Federal Office for the Environment, the methodology of water risk assessments of equity portfolios, and an investor guide on Basin and Water Security engagement, which we're presenting to you today. Jenny also co-authored a study on water risks and financial markets for the Federal Office of the Environment in 2018. And last but not least, we have Kees Auwaerter. Kees Auwaerter is a responsible investment officer at Actiam. Actiam offers sustainable investment strategies and solutions to insurance companies, pension funds, banks, and distribution partners. He is responsible for developing impact measurement models at Actiam's focus themes, water, climate, and land. And he's also responsible for the process of ESG integration in Actiam investment portfolios. Thank you very much to all of you for being here today and sharing your expertise with us. We will open with a short scene setter from Susan Blank and Isabella Pagotto. Then Robin Miller will provide a perspective on the importance and the impact of investor engagement. Jenny Yorish will continue by introducing the concept of Basin and Water Security and exploring the different components of an impactful and credible engagement strategy on water. And finally, Kees Auwaerter will present Actiam's approach to water engagement, and we will finish with a 10-minute Q&A. And for those of you who don't know South Pole yet, I'm going to give a short introduction. We're a leading project developer and globally recognized advisor on climate action. We've been in the business of fighting climate change and developing results-based climate and water solutions from the get-go since our founding in 2006. Today, we have our boots on the ground in 18 global offices, and our team of 300 experts is working side by side with companies, the public sector, and investors to help them create value on their climate and water journey. And we've been doing this successfully for over 15 years now. Our solutions have helped reduce millions of tons of CO2 globally, help support the development of the clean technologies we urgently need, safeguard precious ecosystems, and improve living and working conditions for countless people around the world. Now I would like to hand over the word to Susan Blank and Isabella Pagotto, who will tell us a bit about the Swiss government's work on water and how we have come to collaborate on investor engagement.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. Also, on behalf of the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment, I would also like to welcome you to this webinar. Together with the Swiss Develop Corporation, we share some background information on why we decided to mandate South Pole with the elaboration of this engagement guide. Traditionally, the Federal Office for the Environment has been engaged with water issues within the borders of our country, but also in collaboration with our neighbor countries. Almost 40 years, for example, Switzerland agreed with France on the world's first transboundary treaty on shared groundwater resources. However, regulation of our national water sources is only one part of the story. Every activity in the real economy has a financial side. Regulation is the national level, thus is not the only channel via which we can have an impact on water security. It's very important. Investment decisions influence water issues beyond national borders. And that's why our intention, also as a country with a global financial center, to examine the options for making investments water-friendly. Water risks are financial risks. The Global Risk Report of the World Economic Forum situates the water crisis among the world's top 10 risks, both in terms of likelihood and impact. Moreover, extreme weather events induced by climate change further increase water risks. Other environmental risks, such as pollution, are linked with water issues too, as large proportions of surface water are polluted across all continents, as you can see on this slide. Considering water risk as financial risk is a very important issue. The Global Water Report estimates that $425 billion of assets are exposed to water risks. It's important to understand the twofold connection between finance and the environment. Environmental risks reveal how environmental damages affect our economy and society. And on the other hand, environmental impacts show how our economic activities affect the environment. These connections need to be tackled jointly. For water, this implies that water risk can only be mitigated by reducing the negative impact we have on water security. Our aim is to provide the foundations to make finance more sustainable. Thereby, our work builds on two main cornerstones. First, it is science-based in order to build on solid grounds and to avoid greenwashing. Second, it focuses on alignment with internationally agreed environmental goals and, among those, the SDGs, because they set the requirements to achieve sustainable levels of resource consumption. Consequently, our tools and methodologies also focus on the alignment of investments decisions with those environmental goals. Among the alternative on investment strategies, we have identified investor engagement as particularly effective. The guide now on how to align with SDG 6 seeks to support investors in engaging investment companies towards resourcing negative impacts on water sources. And so we are pleased to provide this guide as a tool for investors to intensify their engagement activities. Thank you very much for your attention, and now I would like to hand over to Isabella.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I would like to thank the Swiss Ministry of Environment and South Pole for hosting this webinar that made it possible for me to be here with you today to represent the global program Water of the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency. Bearing responsibilities as one of the water towers of Europe, and at the same time being an old decentralized democracy where everything we do is the result of a compromise between different interests, in Switzerland, we developed a strong knowledge in forecasting, investing in, and handling water usage. As my colleague from the Swiss Ministry of Environment was saying, we are here in an interdependent world where water resource use is relevant at local, national, regional, transboundary, and global level. Today's message is we are running out of water. Most of the fresh water reserves underground are being depleted right now, and glaciers are melting. These are the two main forms of water reserves we have. At the same time, 80% of the wastewater goes back into rivers untreated, especially in the developing world, while it could be recycled. Water is also increasingly cause for conflicts among competing users. Think of agriculture, industry, domestic use, but also among countries. Rivers and underground water are not knowing administrative boundaries or borders. This is a source of risks, but it can also be a tremendous opportunity for new, innovative ways of partnering to maximize sustainable development impact. The Global Programme Water of the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency works to improve the chances for poor countries to adapt to global changes. Because poverty, the effects of climate change and water scarcity are transnational issues, solidarity among all peoples, all countries, and all organizations is more necessary than ever. It is also with this in mind, Switzerland played a key role in shaping and negotiating SDG 6, the global water goal, which is something historically new that nobody would have ever hoped to achieve. Our focus is on two aspects. First, avoid negative impact to avoid risk, but also catalyzing innovative solutions for sustainable development, economic, environment, and social and peaceful society. We do this by influencing policies and knowledge, by acting as a development agency, by acting as a catalyst and promote innovation and partnerships with governments, international organizations, the UN, development banks, civil society, private sector, and think tanks. One recent example is the Blue Peace Index we have developed as part of the Tech for Good initiative with the Economist Intelligence Unit, just to name one of them. All in all, we engage together with our partners towards systemic change globally and specifically to support sustainable development and peaceful societies in partner countries in emerging economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne and Isabella, for this great introduction. It is great that the Swiss government is taking such an active role in addressing these highly relevant topics. Next up, we have Robin Miller, who will tell us a bit about Ceres' wonderful work with the Investor Water Toolkit and give us an introduction into investor engagement, which will be the topic for the rest of this webinar. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Mathilde. And I'm so delighted to be a part of this webinar and want to congratulate all who contributed to this report. So I'll structure my remarks on the importance of investor engagement on water into three main questions. The first, what is investor engagement? The second, what impact does it have? And finally, why is investor engagement on water particularly important? But first, I want to provide a brief window into the work we do at Ceres on the next slide. Ceres is a sustainability nonprofit advocacy organization based in the United States, and we've been around for 30 years working with institutional investors, companies, and policymakers on moving towards a more sustainable global economy. Teams at Ceres house expertise in climate and energy, water security and water pollution, and deforestation, as well as just and inclusive economies. Ceres is marking a decade of working on water issues. In the last 5 of those years, we've increasingly involved institutional investors through the Investor Water Hub. This is a working group of our broader Ceres investor network. And this group seeks to provide a platform for sharing and co-developing methods to assess and act upon water risks and water opportunities. We've seen steady growth in this group and are glad to now have over 130 institutional investor members. One of the examples of the co-developed projects is the Ceres Investor Water Toolkit. And this is on the next slide. And it's an online resource that provides methods, case studies, and more on water risk integration in portfolio decisions. The report we're focusing on for today's webinar is already embedded into the toolkit within a few sections. So next I'll zoom to the engagement chapter. Turning back to the three guiding questions, the first was, what is investor engagement? We can go to the next slide. So investor engagement can take several forms, and investors often have active corporate engagement strategies aimed primarily at gathering information on potential risks, as well as improving their portfolio companies' practices and policies. Ultimately, this engagement can mitigate environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, and specifically water risks. And in some cases, this engagement can generate positive impact. In practical terms, this can take the form of a direct dialogue between a company and investor on a specific topic or a variety of topics. It can also be a collaborative engagement, such as the one highlighted on this slide, the Global Investor Engagement on Meat Sourcing, which brings together over 90 institutional investors with more than 11 trillion in combined assets to write letters to 6 leading fast food companies asking them what they are doing to address the water and climate risks from sourcing meat and dairy in their supply chains. And then finally, investor engagement can escalate in some geographies to filing a shareholder resolution or a shareholder proposal that may appear on a company's annual shareholder meeting ballot. And this is a very strong signal of an investor's desire to raise a topic of importance to a company. Turning to the second question, and on the next slide, what impact does investor engagement have? I want to highlight a graphic from the Investor Water Toolkit, which references the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, or ICCR's hierarchy of impact. This graphic, which you can view in much more detail on the toolkit, shows a progression that often happens when one or more investors begin bringing an issue of importance to a company. It starts with a base of a company acknowledging the issue. Then it progresses to a company developing a policy, setting goals, designing metrics, tracking progress around those metrics with external verification, and eventually and hopefully turning what may have been a negative issue for a company from an investor's perspective into a positive impact. All along the way, investors may engage with the modes of engagement I mentioned previously through dialogue, through collaborative engagements such as letters or other sign-ons, and through shareholder resolutions. And a lot of the accountability lies in the monitoring of public disclosure from companies. So to provide a key example on impact, for many years, investors have filed resolutions with Sanderson Farms, one of the largest poultry producers in the United States, who ranks last in Ceres' benchmark of food and beverage companies on water risk called Feeding Ourselves Thirsty. This year, a resolution was filed yet again, but this time the resolution requested the company disclose water risk in alignment with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, standards. This was the first SASB-related resolution to come to a vote after BlackRock, one of the largest asset managers in the world, issued their 2020 letter to CEOs stressing the importance of SASB compliance. The company, Sanderson Farms, opposed the policy, and the resolution went to vote and received 11% support from shareholders. This seems like a small number, but it's actually fairly significant. But then later that day, Sanderson Farms issued a press release announcing that it would implement not just the request for SASB disclosure on water risk, but it announced that it would produce an entire set of SASB compliant metrics. BlackRock, the company's largest shareholder, later issued a voting bulletin explaining that it voted against the proposal mainly due to its engagements with the company and the company's willingness to produce a SASB-aligned sustainability reporting. So I'll close my remarks on the next slide by reflecting on the final question. Why is investor engagement on water particularly important? This slide shows the depiction of unique properties of water, as well as its benefits to business and the responsibilities that businesses have. Investors, specifically shareholders and even bondholders, can use the engagement process to interact with companies around these unique properties of water. I'll highlight 3 main reasons. First, engaging on water can promote financial long-term stability. So engaging on ESG and water-related management actions such as goal setting, disclosure, governance oversight, and ensuring robust supply chains, all that are important to water, enhance a company's ability to generate long-term financial returns. Second, engaging on water can provide business benefits. Shareholder engagement interactions can potentially help corporate boards and management make better informed decisions. Furthermore, dialogues between shareholders and their portfolio companies can provide better communication and understanding between parties on freshwater concerns and opportunities. And finally, engaging on water can provide useful insights. Engagement gives investors helpful information about the quality of management, strategy, the capacity and the ability of companies to respond to current and future water risks. And additionally, it can help investors develop better insights into investment, innovation, and growth opportunities. So I'll leave it at that, as you'll hear much more from the rest of our speakers, and I'll welcome any questions on our work in the Q&A section. So I'll turn it back to you, Mathilde.
Thank you very much, Robin. As Robin has clearly highlighted, investor engagement can be a very powerful tool for change. It is, however, also very important that it is done in the right way, ensure that it creates the maximum impact. That's what we at South Pole have tried to do with the Guide on Investor Water Engagement, which Jenny is going to present to you now. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thanks a lot, Mathilde, for the warm introduction, and hello, everyone. And I would also really like to thank Susan and Isabella for setting the scene, and also to Robin for your inputs on the importance of investor engagement on water. And I would already like to thank Case, who will give you a hands-on example of how this is put into practice in a few minutes. I'm very excited that I have the opportunity to present to you our recently published investor water engagement approach today. This short introduction will hopefully equip you with an initial understanding of the concept of basin water security, the main steps you need to take in order to design an impactful water strategy, and where you can actually find additional tools and resources to do so. You can read up on everything I briefly discussed with you today in the actual investor guide, as well as in our technical report on how to assess water risks of public equity portfolios. So when we started our collaboration with the Federal Office for the Environment, we reflected on what the most powerful approach to change the current way investors are dealing with water risks is. And as we've already heard from Robin just now, investor engagement is a very powerful tool for change. However, so far, investor engagement on water has mainly focused on policy setting, risk mitigation, and water efficiency on site level. While these tools are crucial to improve water management and water security, they are actually the necessary groundwork that any company should act upon. So investors that really want to focus on creating positive change need to dig deeper and focus on the root causes of water risks. So reducing the water use and therefore increasing the water efficiency on site level is very important, but water risks do not only occur on site level. As we know, they also occur up and downstream of that site in the basin, in the so-called water basin that the site is located in. So therefore, investors should engage in improving the state of water resources in a basin and striving towards a basin water security. So how is basin water security defined? I will briefly let you in on our reasoning for the definition proposed in our guide and here on the next slide. So SDG 6 aims to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, as you probably know. And these targets can seem daunting for a company or for any investor to tackle, as they are global problems that need to be addressed on a global level. And therefore, we have broken down SDG 6 and developed the concept of basin water security. Focusing on a basin and on basin water security goes far beyond encouraging investees to be more water efficient, as mentioned before. It prompts investees to look beyond their fence line to analyze how they can make a long-term and positive contribution to the security of water basins. Therefore, we define basin water security as the goal to foster sustainable water quantity and quality of freshwater resources for all users in a water basin in the long term. The four concepts you see on the slide are the concepts that an investor or any other stakeholder needs to comply with in order to achieve basin water security and ultimately SDG 6. In order to help investors navigate through their engagement approach, we have applied a three-pillar framework, as you can see on the slide: understand, design, and act. And the framework, in our case, consists of 10 steps that an investor can and should systematically follow in order to create and implement an engagement strategy focused on having a sustainable impact on basin water security. So I will briefly walk you through the steps, and the understand step is the very first phase of the engagement process. This is where the investor defines who he will be engaging with. And we've just gone through the very first step of the framework with you, so understanding basin water security. This is obviously very important for an investor to understand, as he will be engaging with companies on this topic. The second step is understanding which industries are exposed to high risks and therefore need to be prioritized in the engagement. There are different approaches that can be taken in order to identify which industries are most exposed to water risks. So we at South Pole, for example, have developed, together with the Federal Office for the Environment, a methodology that accounts for the materiality of physical water risks, as well as the footprint and geographic location of industries. So you can read up on this approach in our technical report. Finally, the investor needs to understand which are the low and moderate performers in those industries. Investees that are exposed to water risks but have taken little to no action on water management pose a material risk for your portfolio. And at the same time, these companies also present an opportunity for making a strong impact through engagement efforts and should therefore be targeted first. Moving to the next phase, the design phase, there are as well three main steps that an investor needs to take. In the first step on the left side, you can see that an investor needs to commit to basin water security through a public commitment from key decision makers within the organization. And this commitment can then be incorporated into the engagement strategy and clearly demonstrates what the investor expects from the investees. And then in the middle, you can see the second step, which entails the development, the actual development of the engagement strategy. There are a lot of aspects that an investor needs to consider when defining the strategy. For example, which asset class to focus on, the timing, the ownership, the length and number of engagements. So what we recommend is to start the engagement with a small number of companies and to focus rather on the quality than on the quantity of engagements. And then thirdly, on the very right side, it's all about defining meaningful metrics and targets, which is the last step of the design phase. And well, investors should really define targets that are so-called SMART targets, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound targets. And in our guide, we've compiled a list of quantitative metrics aligned with the 4 principles of basin water security, which I showed in a couple of slides earlier, that should be measured when conducting an engagement. And moving to the last phase of the engagement strategy, which is the ACT phase, and where it's actually starting with the actual engagement, and it starts with a dialogue and assessment of where the investee company stands, which you can see on the top left puzzle piece. So our report features a questionnaire that helps investors to understand where an investee stands on water engagement and water management, and what needs to be improved in order to move towards basin water security. This questionnaire can help you to make the case for the company to participate in the engagement by showing the investee that there are a lot of aspects that the company needs to improve on. And then the investor should initiate a conversation with the investee and identify recommended actions. And this should include long-term goals that the investee commits to, as well as identifying quick wins. And then on the top right puzzle piece, you can see that it's about defining priority basins. So rather than focusing on disclosure and risk mitigation, the action areas identified with the investee should be focused on positive impact in the right areas. Therefore, companies should define some priority basins that they want to work in and take action, and starting with those that are highly affected by water risks. On the bottom right puzzle piece, you can see that it's about measuring impact and integrating the lessons learned. Obviously, impact needs to be monitored when setting targets on a regular basis, and one can adjust and adapt the approach accordingly if need be. And then lastly, on the bottom left, you can see in the last step of the act phase and the entire engagement process, we think it's very important to engage with investor networks, as cooperation is really crucial. So Ceres Investor Water Hub, which Robin is leading, for example, is a very good and great network for collaboration and sharing your experiences. So as you can see, water risks are a complex problem, and they require global, regional, and notably local action. And our guide and the Understand, Design, Act framework intend to help investors to navigate this complexity and generate a positive impact on water basin level, and thereby contributing to achieving SDG 6. So with that brief introduction, I would like to close this short presentation, and happy and welcoming any questions in the Q&A session. And back to you, Mathilde.
Thank you very much, Denny, for giving us a small teaser on the guide. And as mentioned, please read our guide for more details. We will send it to you with the recording of this webinar. So if there are three main things that you take away from this short introduction, it is that water risks are local, and any impact you create on water should therefore be targeted on the basin you're working with. And second, collaboration is absolutely essential. No company can create impact on its own, and there are many stakeholders in a water basin that need to work collaboratively to find a solution. And third, engagement is a powerful tool. Use it wisely and develop an engagement strategy that is impactful and helps you achieve your targets. So now I'd like to hand over to Kees from Actiam, who will tell us how Actiam is actually engaging on water. Please take it away, Kees.
So thank you everyone for joining this webinar. And before I start with my presentation, I will first congratulate everyone involved in this engagement guide on water for investors, because I think it's very crucial work that has to be done in engaging companies on impact. And I really want to congratulate everyone involved, because I think it's really a step forward in engaging companies on the topic of water. We at Actiam really want to engage companies to achieve impact. And before I'm going to explain how we do that, I first want to take you a couple of steps back in a big trend we're seeing. Because why would an institutional investor in the end care about a natural resource like water? And that's actually fairly simple, because it's not only that water is a natural resource that fits into societies, but it's also crucial for companies for their existence. So it's also a financial risk. And what we have been seeing over the past years, and that's going for quite a while, is that a huge growth in world population puts an enormous pressure on natural resources. So what we see is that around 2040, we almost need 2.5 globes to actually to fit the demand of energy, water, and food. And you can actually see that we, in the end, in 2030, even need 40% more water, and that's quite a lot. And how are we actually gonna solve that? And the second point is that besides that, also the growing world population puts enormous pressure on the planet. As you can see, things like ozone depletion, climate change, that by an increasing amount of consumption by this growing world population, it only puts pressure on the natural resources, but also on the planet as a whole. And because of this, we not only see that society gets hurt by it, because, for example, local communities have a lack of water, a lot of polluted water, but it also puts a lot of pressure on companies acting in that environment. So besides companies are having impact on society, they're also highly dependent on it. And that's also what I liked a lot about previous presentation of the Swiss government, where you can see actually the interdependency of companies on the environment, So on the one hand side, they're impacting the environment, so they're impacting the local resource, but on the other hand, they're very dependent on the environment they're acting in. And for us that is the very main and a very crucial reason to care about water as a topic and to really help companies, making them aware and helping them solving the solution. In order to do that, we have constructed a framework. As you can see on the next slide, we have identified a framework, and I will explain you in short how it works. So we try to identify a couple of blocks. So we judge companies on a certain of indicators. So the most important and the simplest one is actually the unacceptable behavior part, which you see on the lower end, where we actually just judge companies on their behavior and on the ethical actions they're taking. So things like child labor, forced labor, whether they're producing tobacco, etc. We really don't want to invest in those companies at all. We don't care about whether that costs our money or not. It's just an ethical decision. That's the unacceptable behavior part. Much more interesting and actually more relevant for the topic of water is the blocks above, and especially the ones in the middle that are highlighted. So the non-adaptive, the at-risk, and the adaptive part. So what we're trying to do is identify of all companies we can invest in, whether companies can make the transition to a sustainable society, because that's what we believe is needed in order to actually make sure that you mitigate all the environmental risks and all the water risks that you're facing. And of course, not all companies are facing the same risks, but the companies that are heavily dependent on water have to be adaptive and have to change their behavior around certain water basins to make sure that they mitigate a lot of risks. So we try to identify these companies, and then we determine whether we think they're non-adaptive, whether they're at risk, or whether they are adaptive. And as you can see on the next slide, we also do that for water, and we identified in that way a couple of groups around water. So on the one hand side, you have the water laggards, and that's actually companies that are lagging so much behind or are performing that much unethical behavior that we don't want to invest in them at all. So we exclude those companies. Actually, as of course this is an engagement guide, for us is engagement actually the most important tool for, on the one hand side, helping companies to reduce their negative impact on society or seeing possible opportunities, but on the other hand also mitigating their dependency, the risk they're facing around a certain topic. And we of course don't do that alone. So we are an asset manager that manages around 65 billion in assets, but it's still relatively small in comparison to the rest of the world. And for that reason, in engagement, which is what is crucial, is working together. And for us, platforms like, for example, Ceres is crucial in that collaboration, because they're doing so much good work in bringing all different investors together on certain very specific topics. So also on water. If you look at their water toolkit, for example, that's a very useful tools in there to help you set up engagement together. And this engagement, especially around water, has been going on for quite a while. So what we have been done always, and especially like a couple of years back, we engaged companies mostly on their policies, which means we engage companies on their headquarters and saying, okay, you have to take water as a topic into account. So do you see the risks? Do you have certain policies in place? And then based on that, we actually defined KPIs, but they were all on global level. And what we have learned, and which is very important around the topic of water, it's a very local problem. So even if a headquarters, which is based in the US or in Europe somewhere, and it's very not, it's very global, globally focused, it might be that around certain facilities, as South Pole also mentioned, that around certain basins, production facilities are at risk, or they actually have to deal with certain local water issues. And for that reason, we're currently in the development and we're also in the execution of a new type of engagement, which is really focused around localized water engagement. And with that, so we defined, together with Sustainalytics and some other investors, we defined certain engagement goals. So, and those are very locally focused, because in the end, we only engage companies that are located around the river Tietê in Brazil and around the Vaal River in Botswana. And it's very crucial because we have never done something like this before, and I don't think that it happens a lot. Mostly, you don't go to a local region to see all the companies are active in that region. But by doing that, we actually, on the one hand side, of course, try to improve awareness, as stated on the left-hand side. But I believe, to me, is much more important is that we actually want to achieve tangible impacts on the ground. And that's what we try to do in this very, I would say, innovative engagement, that by actually trying to engage all companies that are active around a certain basin and try to make them in a collaborative engagement, try to let them act together. We hope that they actually make those water basins a little bit better than that they're now, and therefore also decrease their risk they're facing around water resources. So thank you for listening, and I would like to take any questions in the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. And also a big thank you to all of our other speakers. You've highlighted very nicely how we can use finance and more specifically engagement to have a positive impact on water. And I would now like to start the Q&A. So if you could all turn on your cameras again, please. We have a couple of minutes left. So let's see what questions we have received from the audience. Okay, well, we have some questions coming in. Let me start with this one. So the first question is, does the methodology account for basin level regulatory and reputational water risks that can have financial implications for businesses and investors alike? So I think I'm going to ask Denny if you would like to take this question.
Sure. That's a very good question. And the problem with reputational and regulatory water risks is that there is very little freely available data on these types of risks available on industry level. So we did not include this in the risk analysis methodology, which is part of the technical report, but we do suggest very strongly to include this in every engagement process which any investor goes through, and this is then mentioned in the investor guide. But we do not include this for pre-selecting high-risk industries, but we do very strongly advise investors to assess this then in every specific case and then on basin level.
Great, thank you so much. We have another question from the audience. So how do you manage interest and trade-offs amongst the various stakeholders, so private, public, and local stakeholders of a watershed? And how do you manage accountability of water depletion and contamination?
This is a very important question. Yes, to give you a short answer on this rather complex question, it's very important. That's why the focus, which has been explained by the colleagues in the presentation, is on collective action and including the stakeholders right at the beginning. And the clear communication is really important in any engagement at basin level. Stakeholder mapping and have very clear communication on what wants to be achieved and targets, and communicating with the stakeholders is in a transparent manner is very, very important according to our experience in our basin work. That's from my side. I don't know if other colleagues who are active in the basin directly would like to complement.
I can only say, maybe from an investor's standpoint, that especially this collective action is actually, I would say, a crucial word, because we can, for example, engage one company who is active somewhere, and even if he does everything right, then still the basin can be very, very much harmed by everyone else involved. And for that same reason, you also need the local government. And mostly the community is mostly the ones that get hurt the most. So therefore, I think it's very crucial that especially investors, governments, and local companies actually work together on the solution for a certain basin instead of one party alone.
I can layer on too, just that we encourage anyone who's doing this work to find out what are the many basins already have some sort of local convening group. So work directly with those folks. It's mainly for private equity investors, but we have a resource in the Investor Water Toolkit called the Private Equity Due Diligence Decision Tree, and it asks a lot of these questions around whether companies are themselves engaging with those types of groups in a basin, and that could be an extra layer there. So there's some additional questions, and sometimes it goes back to investors and companies doing that work that Isabella said is very important to be addressing.
Thank you very much to all of you. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll try to answer them via email, because we actually wanted to keep the webinar to 45 minutes, so we're just in time. Maybe one more question that came in a while ago and that I wanted to address is one on the institutional settings. So weak institutional settings produce poor water management. Are you considering finding ways to contribute strengthening institutions, or at least not investing in industries which take advantage of weak institutional settings to do business? So I think this is really also where the Swiss government is taking a very active role. So that's part of the work of the Swiss government, to strengthen these institutions and to work with other governments on finding those weak spots. And in terms of not working with certain industries or companies, that's really something that we wanted to avoid. We also discussed this with Actiam, but there is a certain, of course, as you saw on Actiam's pyramid, there are certain companies that you really do not want to work with, because it may be a loss of your time, because these companies definitely will not take the extra mile and go there. But otherwise, we really encourage all companies to start working on this. So I don't think that any companies or industries would be excluded from the engagement completely. If anyone wants to add anything to that.
No, I can only agree with that. So for us, exclusion is, you always have to have that as a final solution, because else you can engage companies for years, and that's also a bit of the difficult thing with engagement in the financial industry, I would say, is that on the one hand side, it can be the most effective tool for creating real impact in the real economy. And on the other hand, is a very good tool for greenwashing, to say, okay, we engage these companies, at the same time we just keep investing them. And that's I think a very fine balance between, on the one hand side, really wanting to move a company, and on the other hand side, you have to draw a line somewhere in order to also make companies that are actually want to change, that they benefit a little bit more. And although I know that if by divesting you don't change anything in the real economy, in the end we don't have any solution left if they don't want to change.
Great, thank you so much, Kees, for these final words. I'm very happy to see that there are so many questions coming in. I think we sparked some interest with our webinar. So thank you again to all of the speakers so much for your great presentations. And thank you to all of you listeners. We'll be sending you the webinar and the report, and feel free to reach out to our speakers also directly in case of any questions.